is sun's all blocked up, so it's all a bit, might be a bit croaky and prone to a coughing fit, so just please do bear with me. Thank you very much for letting me talk at this paper. I sort of want to say something before I begin. This research at the moment is kind of currently in progress. Normally, my research is situated on looking at kind of intellectual history on the far right, looking at Holocaust denial and how these things are framed. But what I'm particularly interested in, and this sort of mirrors into with my work about Holocaust denial, is how Holocaust denial from the sort of 1945 changes throughout the period up into sort of 2000, 2001. So what I'm particularly interested in thinking about sort of the reason for this, and partly is anti-fascism and how this feeds in to this dialogue and discussion. So I've chosen to talk about some of the battles that take place in Trafalgar Square in the 1960s. And you can see from the opening slides just an example of some of the kind of iconic battles taking place. And I'll talk a bit more about what battle that is in a moment. But first and foremost, I think one of the important things about Trafalgar Square, or perhaps just to sort of put some context around this, is just the importance that urban public places play in the life of nations, in the sense that this is a place, a stage for rituals. It obviously contains national monuments, and it's obviously a site of protest that has been the case in the 19th century and up until now. So it's still, and of course, they're still happening today, it's still happening. So these battles continue to take place. So what I'm going to kind of look at is this relationship between place and national identity in the place of Trafalgar Square itself. Because there's a huge body of literature on this, so I'm not going to kind of go into that. But in the paper, what I want to talk about is how either fascist or neo-Nazi groups try to claim the square as their own, as a platform to spread their message, and how anti-fascism works against that, and also tries to claim the square themselves as a site of anti-fascism. And as I say, my research is ongoing, so I'm very keen to hear your thoughts and feedback afterwards as well. But I suppose what I found particularly interesting as well, contained with this, and it again ties in with the question about the 60s and pre-68, and for the far right pre-67, the formation of the National Front in Britain, is how recently there's a kind of huge, been a kind of huge kind of swathe of kind of memoirs or retrospectives on this time, coming from both left and right, and how they sort of frame the history of this time within their own kind of memories, and how it's either distorted, and what it perhaps says about what the battles in the 60s mean today, and how they look retrospectively on those. So, as I say, this kind of time has given a kind of reflection. Some of the people who sort of retired from far-right movements have begun to kind of recast the history of this time, either in pure and utter fantasy, so for example Merry England by Colin Jordan, the kind of creative fantasy world, or Uprising, in which he kind of envisions what it'd be like if actually the far right won. And of course the far right as well, far left or anti-fascist as well, kind of this anti-fascist movement about beating the fascists, no retreat, and how these can be put together as different narratives. But the main one I want to focus on is Blood in the Square by John Bean, obviously on the right, but particularly because it actually focuses on the battles of Trafalgar Square and what takes place within them. And it's it's an interesting book, one, because it's so terribly and brilliantly terribly written. It's so funny in places, because at points he talks about an affair that the main character, Victor Blackwood, is having, and he calls the character in the book Jane, but keeps constantly changing name to Janet. So I don't know if that's a match or some kind of slip about something he actually had going on at the time. So there's kind of full of these kind of weird things going on within it. But I think the reason why he focuses on Trafalgar Square is because of the activities that it engaged with anti-fascists within the square. And of course as well because of the importance of the square in his mind, really, that it's the sort of centre of London, it's sort of nation capital, and frequently these are reported in the press. So not only do these kind of rallies get more attention in the mass media than other smaller groups and gatherings, but they can also kind of command a lot of public attention, and so it's quite clear to see why the square has such appeal for him and other groups. And it's also a place where, of course, you can get attention, but it's also a way of kind of staking a claim to the right path of Britain, and with kind of, Lord Nelson looking down on you of history, looking upon that, or as one anti-fascist commentator, but perhaps it was a good way of keeping the pigeons away. But what it was a mean to communicate and attract message to get supporters, of course. So this is very much about public getting of attention. This is kind of not about the kind of internal discussions, dialogues that are taking place with them. It's kind of a way in which to have a mouthpiece. But also it's a way and a place at which these two kind of groups can meet. So anti-fascists and fascists meeting together in this one place with kind of diametrically opposed ideological ideologies. It's kind of almost like a site, a fault line, if you like. So this kind of title paper, Enemy on the Stage, is not just because the far right are on the stage, but also at times the left is on the stage as well. So there's a kind of sense that when a right-wing rally is going on, or far right rally is going on, the left will come to interrupt it, the right come, vice versa. So it's very much who's on the stage at the time. But first, I just want to talk about how these accounts are being carried out retrospectively, and what these battles tell us about the way that anti-fascism actually challenged the narratives of the far right and how they began to kind of package themselves in line with what the far right, what the anti-fascists have been doing. And just also what's interesting about the way that this it's kind of semi-autobiographical, biographical, and the narrative that he puts across, but it's interesting the way in which he frames what the party was, what this party was about. And the party, just to point out about the blurb, actually, this is off the back of the book, and it was where he talks about it was also a time which hardly knew any political reference and freedoms of expression was paramount. And what he kind of tries to do within this is suggest that, kind of mythologises the 60s slightly, but also his role within the 60s, what his party was saying and doing. And he does this in a variety of ways. And particularly, for the fact that it's written in the like as a kind of precursor to the National Front. So obviously, he's got the history to kind of fill in the gaps, and he knows what's going to happen. But I think what's interesting about the way in which he kind of frames what he's doing, so this is just a fictional description of a meeting that takes place, which is the National Action Movement, is the fictional party that he's created. And he's, as I say, he's appearing at this particular rally against the anti-apartheid movement. So he's often talking about movements that do exist. He talks about his fight for the 62 group, which I'll come to in a moment. But what I think is interesting in this, it shows the splits within the right themselves that have taken place in the 1950s into the 60s. It wasn't that far, united by any stretch. So we can see within here, he says, the Mosley blokes from the Union are also here, possibly some nutters from Jordan's National Socialist Party. The 62 group have heard about this, they turned up to give Jordan a good thumb as well as they see us. And what I think is just quite comical about this as well is that that's why none of his chaps are wearing badges, but on the massive great banners. So I mean, it's not really disguising the alliance there. But anyway, the banner was the movement said "Stand by White Africa," and this is kind of further kind of characterised in the way that Blackwell is actually quite pleased when the media get involved or when violence takes out, because it gets him in the newspapers, and he often comments in this. There's a character Blackwell, which is obviously a stand-in for himself, pity about the press equating us with Mosley, but it could have been worse. We could have been quoted with Jordan's Nazis. But what I think is interesting, what is interesting about this is actually Bean's role within this. He's completely kind of detached any connection he has historically with Colin Jordan, because of course they worked together for a long time, and they worked together in the BNP, and quite a lot of the movements that they're taking place in this is that they've been associated together. They kind of Bean had separated from the League of Empire Loyalists in '57, so Jordan, and they'd set up different parties, the National Labour Party for Bean and the White Defence League for Jordan, but then they come together to create the first BNP. And the kind of mission statement for that is to free Britain from the domination of international international Jew-controlled money, the lending system, and the preservation of Northern European folk and stock. And in the December issue, the party's main kind of issue, two further policies to sending those coloured immigrants already here back to their homelands, and impeaching the Tory cabinet and the Labour cabinet for their complicity in the black invasion, and hold a trial of those journalists who have aided them and abetted them. So they kind of have distinct roles together within this, but they're kind of eulogising and reframing his past and his relationship with Jordan within this. And there's another occasion in where they kind of go on a rally together, and it's an example of which there's a Jewish meeting to commemorate the Warsaw Uprising in April 61. And the BNP arrive at the theatre, and they kind of try to break up the meeting, which results in a riot, which results in a fight between two, with their banners proclaiming the Jews started World War II. And so Bean and Jordan are arrested together, and they're both fine. So their kind of relationship is very much solidified. Eventually, Bean claims that his break with Jordan came as a result of this kind of interlude on this fracas over the Warsaw Uprising, but in fact actually they didn't break till 62. So I mean it seems a long gap between the two to break these up. But what so it's clear that retrospectively in the novel that he's kind of recasting his past within that. But what also is interesting within the novel is I'll come to the role of the anti-fascists in a second. But how this product of reformulating past events in line with current thinking as well, because while Jordan is depicted as a nutter, I mean, which he obviously is, but I mean, Bean is not far from behind, not far from him either. So when he breaks with him, he kind of almost tries to say that afterwards, well, that was because he was too German neo-Nazi, but of course Bean carries on with this, and it's interesting in the fictionalised novel. What happens is there's a particular moment at which a supporter of the National Working Movement is talking about sterilisation of immigrants that are here, and the character Bergwood, who is Blackwood, who is Bean, says, no, he doesn't speak for our party. This is not us. We don't believe in this because he's trying to attract new members, etc. But in 63, so after he leaves Jordan, he writes in Combat magazine that that if black immigrants should be deported, but if they want to stay, if they are allowed to remain in the UK, if they are legally enforced to be sterilised by correct medical supervision. So I mean, the facts of the book, he's talking about that these people are an abomination, and it's why we can't get votes and why no one's attracted to us. Writing it in 2012. But in 63, he's actually saying these things himself. So it's quite interesting that this is a reformulation of far-right policy, in the present, if you like. So what role do the anti-fascists play in these particular movements? Well, it's interesting. In 1962, on the 3rd of July, there is a rally in which Jordan's actually sentenced, because we're given a fine for what he says. But the meeting ends in a riot, and it's from a combination of CND, some communist members of the parties, and some Jewish organisations which aren't affiliated with their actual parties. They're kind of acting on their own initiative, not from the directions of those movements themselves. But they rush the stage, and this creates a big violence. So, but what's interesting is the reason why these people are doing it is not because, well, in part for what you're saying, but because the mainstream media or mass media press has not made the public aware of the fact that Colin Jordan has launched the National Socialist Movement. So, I mean, breaking from Bean, he's created his own different part of the National Socialist Movement, and the kind of press hasn't really said anything about it. And if they have reported on Jordan, if you look in the kind of Times or other newspapers at the time, they still kind of say Jordan's in the BNP, which obviously he's not. He's actually created an overtly National Socialist Movement in Britain. So they're trying to kind of, raise awareness of this at the time as well. And so in a sense, what's important here is that this is the left or anti-fascists keeping kind of abreast of what the right are doing and using these demonstrations to try to make a point and inform the public about what this is. So they're also using the media to try to kind of say, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And it's quite interesting that they're the ones that are doing this, but it's being missed by the mass media who report on Jordan. It's not kind of he's reported on, he's in Pathé News, you can look at the reels, he's not invisible. And again, I sort of back this on the 1st of July, this kind of leads to the Sunday People actually taking a bit more interest in what Jordan is doing. And it's when his kind of spearhead paramilitary group first appears in the Sunday People, and there's a kind of massive spread of pictures of their kind of gathering, paramilitary groups, exercises, weaponry, so forth. And it's also at the same time that the public, as a result of anti-fascist actions, is that the public and the press are made aware of Jordan's attempts, and successful attempts, I suppose, to create the World Union of National Socialists. To create the World Union of National Socialists. So again, there's this kind of being made aware of the fact of what's going on, and it's interesting because people kind of think about the World Union of National Socialists at the time, and this comes out from the literature of authorities, that they kind of think it's its own project, but actually all the other kind of members of the far right, so kind of people like Tyndall, Bean, and as well Chesterton are kind of interested in this. But the one clause in it that makes them not want to join or kind of sign up to this idea is the fact that, which is clause 7, which quote says, "We believe that Adolf Hitler was the gift of insatiable providence to a world on the brink of Zionist Bolshevik catastrophe," etc., etc. So you have to pledge allegiance to Hitler to be included within the movement, so they won't do that. But the other policies, they're kind of like, yeah, that'd be all right, don't mind. It's just, so it's it's that kind of strange, like, idea. So, and essentially what this does is it creates a rift, and the former colleagues on the far right, when it's all come to public, become very embarrassed about this, of course. And then, of course, what happens as a result of that, they begin to kind of tie in with Bean, and then there's more interest in what the other parties do. So the BNP meeting, which is with Bean, and again, this is as a product of far left awareness of what's going on. The press go to see a similar BNP retreat to see if they could get similar pictures as they got with Jordan launching the kind of underground military movement. And they don't get anything as kind of militaristic as that, but the fact that there are kind of Spanish phalange, José Martinez is there, and other kind of fascist leaders from around the world are meeting, and it doesn't look good for them either. So the whole kind of thing keeps going across. So this results in much more a vigorous campaign of anti-fascism against the right, because it's publicly available. And so in July '62, you get a big riot in the square as a result of Moses speaking, and then again, attacks on Moses' union movement. And on the 25th of July in '62, there's 40 BNP members are beaten up by the Yellow Star movement. But what this kind of does is essentially, because meetings keep getting broken up and ending in this kind of catastrophe, but they're getting press, but not good press, that actually Jordan and Tyndall begin to realise, as well as Bean, that actually these kind of mass movements are not going to kind of broaden appeal and do what they want to do to get a renewed membership or to get to the kind of, so they actually start abandoning talking in Trafalgar Square at certain points. They still do, going on, but what they move to is a campaign of saying that they're victims, and they're using the media and press to say they're being victimised by the regime. So I'll just wrap up. In a sense, what this does is it begins to make the kind of right sort of think about the ways in which they need to change, and they kind of think about creating this, or Chesterton's making tentative moves by '66 about creating the National Front, bringing these people together. And the idea within this is that they're not necessarily just still fighting campaigns on immigration, but on race as well, and they're beginning to think about whether they need to change this. Sorry, I've kind of talked about but the point I want to get to is this, which is, and I think this is in part as a result of the actions of sort of anti-fascism, is that this is the opening towards the National Front in '67, is the kind of opening words by A.K. Chesterton at the front, which is that the man who thinks this war can be won by announcing slogans like dirty Jews and filthy niggers is a maniac who should not be in the National Front but in a mental hospital. So it's an attempt to kind of try to kind of reformulate the ideas of the party in line with a kind of public that is aware of their underlying Nazi message. And of course, this is all fluff. I mean, they still believe exactly what they believed before, but they're trying to kind of create a media-heavy campaign to try and present themselves as not being like that. So I suppose as a way of kind of concluding is that, but as a way of kind of concluding that these kind of battles over the 60s of Trafalgar Square between fascists and anti-fascists are kind of interestingly still battles being fought today in this reproduction of literature and reliving of the events. And what seems to be happening is that actually the messages that are being coming out of these kind of reformulated histories or biographies of the period, what they're actually doing is they seem to be kind of playing down the extreme messages they had in the 60s in order to kind of make themselves, look more rational and more like kind of picked on by the far left than they actually were. So they're trying to make it look less radical. So in a way, the battle over the square is still going.